Russland hat in der vergangenen Woche mehrere neue Waffensysteme vorgestellt. Die nuklear betriebene Unterwasserdrohne Poseidon, dazu das neue Atom-U-Boot Khabarovsk, was die Poseidon tragen soll. Zuvor hatte Russland bereits den innovativen nuklear betriebenen Marschflugkörper Burevestnik mit unbegrenzter Reichweite vorgestellt. Über beide Systeme behauptet Russland, es gebe dafür keine Verteidigungsmöglichkeit. Wie ist deine Sicht auf Poseidon und Burevestnik? Kannst du bitte ins Detail gehen? Was macht die beiden Systeme so innovativ?
Well, first of all, these are systems that aren't new to the West. Vladimir Putin hinted at the existence of these systems in their development stage back in 2016 when he spoke to Western reporters about the danger of America and the West's approach to arms control, in particular missile defense. He said, if you go forward, we will have to develop new weapons, and we are developing them. In 2018, he actually named these weapons. He publicly acknowledged Burevestnik and Poseidon, along with Sarmat, Avangard, and other systems. So, Russia has been warning the West that there are consequences for their actions, and today we now have almost all of these systems in operation. Sarmat, the heavy ICBM, is being deployed. Avangard, the hypersonic maneuverable warhead, is being deployed on several missile systems. And now the Russian president has announced the successful tests of Burevestnik and Poseidon. All of these weapons are designed to overcome any ballistic missile defense system that the United States might be able to develop. The interesting thing about both Burevestnik and Poseidon is that they can avoid engaging with, a possible Golden Dome system, which is designed to shoot down missiles that are in, a ballistic trajectory. Burevestnik also would be, able to avoid any ground-based missile defense simply by outmaneuvering it. It has unlimited range, according to the Russians. Poseidon is the ultimate weapon of revenge, of second strike. A way to guarantee to the West that if you attack Russia with nuclear weapons, you will lose all the cities on your coastline. Poseidon is a very powerful underwater weapon. Again, these aren't nuclear tests per se. People have talked about that. These are tests of nuclear propulsion systems on weapons that are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. But I think this is in keeping with the, Russian policy direction of the last decade, which is to develop weapon systems that overcome any possible ballistic missile defense shield the United States may attempt to build.
Warum ist es etwas Besonderes, dass diese Waffensysteme nuklear angetrieben werden? Heißt das, dass sie beim Einschlag immer Nuklearwaffen sind, auch wenn sie keinen nuklearen Gefechtskopf tragen?
I mean, I'd have to look at the reactor design, but I would say no. Of course, there would be some contamination when if a nuclear reactor strikes the ground and is destroyed. But, for instance, Burevestnik is carrying a 1 megaton nuclear warhead that will destroy the city, and whatever residual radiation is coming off of the missile reactor, it won't even register on the meter. And it appears that both of these systems are clean burning. It would be problematic to have a weapon that just leaves a trail of radiation every time it's tested. And there appears to be some civilian application to these power plants. If they are this clean burning and they are efficient, they could be used to power, oil rigs in the Arctic. They could be used to power small towns, etc. So I think they're relatively clean. And the nuclear aspect of concern for these is the warheads they're carrying. The propulsion plants themselves are just, a small nuclear power plant.
Warum hat Russland so einen großen Vorsprung in der Waffentechnologie vor dem Westen? Insbesondere bei den Atomwaffen und den Raketen, die diese tragen. Warum sind sie die Ersten, die solche nuklear betriebenen Drohnen in Gebrauch nehmen können?
Well, Russia's approach to defense industry is not the approach of the West. The West, especially since the end of the Cold War, has not been um, mission driven based upon reality, but mission driven based upon a combination of hypothesis, um, uh, arrogance, and profit. The hypothesis is, what will the enemy look like? What is the enemy's capabilities? And much of our strategic thinking is grounded in the decade that came immediately after the Cold War, as we transitioned out of a Cold War mentality into post-Cold War reality, where Russia was not strong, China was not a threat. And so we believe that all we had to do is maintain a um, technological edge, have superior technology, and we would be dominant in the area of strategic nuclear weapons. Um, and we already had some, technology advantages. The Trident missile was a very good weapon system. The Minuteman III continued to be a good weapon system. We had the B-2 bomber coming out. So the feeling was that, we had these weapons and that Russia couldn't catch up. But the reality was that Russia has extraordinarily um, capable defense industry infrastructure, and especially in the field of ballistic missiles, the relationship between design bureaus and the defense industry facilities that would produce these missiles is very tight. And Russia sustained this even in the most difficult days in the 1990s. They didn't close down um, these factories, these think tanks, and they were able to power through, so that today, Russia has the ability to conceive of a weapon system. They don't have to build a new team. They have a team doing it right now, and transition that theory into production because of the close relationship between design bureaus and production facilities. In the United States, we don't have this capability. Look at our Sentinel missile program. It's over budget. It had to be shut down because it's far too expensive. We can't afford it. And so the best we can do is upgrade existing missiles as opposed to build a new missile from scratch. And, you know, we we operate under a system that encourages profit. I mean, defense industry is a business. It's not about defending the country. In Russia, the defense industries are primarily state-owned or, state-controlled. Um, and, their goal is to produce the best weapon possible for the Russian military in the most, efficient manner possible. In America, the goal is to make as much money as possible for the shareholder, not necessarily to produce the best weapon possible, but produce the best weapon that pleases the customer and makes you a lot of money. So contracts tend to get dragged out. Um, we have a persistent problem of low bidding, meaning that when the Pentagon puts out a requirement, the factories come in with the lowest bid possible to get this thing off the ground, and then they have to start, you know, weaving in technology, et cetera. And so whatever system they propose to the Pentagon is almost immediately changed at great expense, and sometimes to the detriment of the efficiency of the weapon system itself. We have a broken defense industry system.
US-Präsident Trump hat als unmittelbare Reaktion auf die neuen russischen Waffensysteme angekündigt, umfangreiche eigene Atomtests durchzuführen. Vizepräsident Vance betonte, die USA müssten prüfen, ob die eigenen Atomwaffen noch allesamt funktionieren. Wie schätzt du den Stand der US-Atomwaffen ein? Entsprechen die Minuteman III und Trident-Raketen noch dem Stand der Technik? Wie steht es um die Atomsprengköpfe, die seit Jahrzehnten lagern und darauf warten, hoffentlich niemals eingesetzt zu werden?
I mean, the biggest problem is, for the United States, we have both a deteriorating ability to deploy weapons, and we have weapons that, nuclear weapons don't last forever. They have to be maintained. And if they're not maintained properly, there's a chance that they won't function properly as designed. You could either get a fizzle or you could get a yield that's far less than what you had anticipated. So on the warhead side, we have done, we both Russia and the United States and all nuclear powers are all major nuclear powers are signatories to the Test Ban Treaty, which means we're not allowed to do the testing of nuclear weapons. And basically that's defined by letting the system go critical. So an actual fission event or fusion event, if it's a hydrogen bomb. And so instead, what they do is they do what they call the subcritical testing, taking advantage of computer technology to simulate things. So you test the components of the missile, and you get right to the point where there could be fission, and then it doesn't go forward, but you're able to estimate what the results would be. And so we do a lot of testing of this nature to confirm the viability of the existing weapons systems. We have to rework the plutonium pits, the actual fissile material. In the past, you would rework a pit and then you would test it, and you'd say, oh, it functions or it doesn't function, and then you would make alterations. Now we do subcritical testing, and we assume that it's going to function the way it is. But in the nuclear business, you lose strategic deterrent effect if people don't believe that your weapons will work. And so there's that. The testing that they're talking about today, the United States is not talking about full-scale nuclear weapons testing. When the president spoke of testing nuclear weapons, what he meant was that since Russia has carried out these tests of these new weapon systems, the United States will do similar testing of its delivery systems to not only give the American people the confidence that their weapons work, but also send a signal to Russia, China, and others that the American deterrent system is online, ready to work, and we're not intimidated by anything anybody else does. And we see already that the U.S. Air Force is getting ready to test a Minuteman ICBM in short order. But this isn't a nuclear weapons test. This is a nuclear weapons delivery test.
Wenn es tatsächlich zu einem vollständigen Nukleartest kommt, wie werden diese Tests aussehen? Werden sie unterirdisch durchgeführt? Werden die USA wieder Südseeatolle sprengen oder die eigenen Wüsten verstrahlen? Wie kann man sich diese Tests vorstellen?
Well, I believe that the United States, by law, is directed to maintain a standby testing capability in the Nevada test site, the underground test site. So we actively maintain tunnels and the capability to do a test at great expense, by the way, billions of dollars. But I think that's what we would see. We wouldn't be seeing any surface testing. Bikini Atoll and the Pacific testing range. These are things of the past. They're not politically. It would be suicide from the United States to resume testing there. There's a lot of negative fallout of the consequence of these tests on the local indigenous peoples. And it would just be suicide for that. And also politically, to be violating the, that aspect of the test ban treaty about, surface testing. I think it would be underground tests. I think the Russians have maintained, similar testing capability at Novaya Zemlya, their island, in China, likewise. But I think all the tests would be underground, with, maybe the exception of a above ground test in extreme situations where, for instance, let's say Russia felt that it had no choice but to carry out a nuclear weapons test that made it clear that Russia's nuclear arsenal was viable, et cetera. Because the big myth going around today in the West is that Russia's nuclear weapons don't work. It's a bluff, they're posturing. So maybe Russia would do an above ground test. But once you cross that threshold, it just generates a lot of momentum in the wrong direction. And so hopefully all nations will adhere to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
Vergangene Woche erst traf Trump in Südkorea mit dem chinesischen Präsident Xi Jinping zusammen. Beide Seiten sprachen von einem guten Gespräch und betonten die gute Beziehung zwischen beiden Staatschefs. Doch was bleibt tatsächlich von diesem Gipfeltreffen? Eine Woche später scheint sich rein gar nichts verändert zu haben. Die USA fahren die gleiche Politik wie vorher. und die Welt scheint ungehindert in ein neues nukleares Wettrüsten zu rasen. Welche Perspektiven siehst du für die Diplomatie zwischen USA und China, aber auch zwischen USA und Russland?
I mean, one of the many weaknesses of the Trump administration is the inability of this president to follow through with broad statements, with action. The State Department, which would normally take the lead in negotiations, has been gutted on July 11th of this year. 1,300 people, many of whom were arms control specialists, were fired. They haven't been replaced. We're not structurally prepared to carry out these negotiations, and the Trump administration doesn't have a coherent policy of what it wants. I mean, this concept of peace through strength doesn't work in the nuclear strategic deterrence because one side can't allow itself to be intimidated by the other and accept a weaker, a weaker settlement. And so, unless Trump is able to transition from, speaking off the cuff to reporters on Air Force One, where many of these statements come from, to actually directing people and agencies to carry out the mission of, pursuing effective arms control. He hasn't given those orders yet. He said we are negotiating with whom, about what? Neither Russia nor China are stepping up saying, yeah, we got some good negotiations going on. When I spoke to Russian diplomats, they're like, no, it's a total vacuum. There's nothing happening. And so you have to be careful because everything we do, has an impact. We go back to President Putin's reaction to the U.S. withdrawal from the ABM Treaty in 2002. And today we're living with that. 23 years after our withdrawal, Russia is deploying systems that our missile defense shield can't touch. Russia has the advantage in intermediate range missiles. China has likewise, extremely effective capabilities the United States can't counter. And if the United States not only ignores arms control, but then starts investing significant resources in the manufacture of a Golden Dome missile shield and the development of new generation of nuclear weapons, we will have a nuclear arms race, and you're racing towards the collective suicide of the world. So this is a race that should never be won.
Der Iran hat nun offiziell erklärt, sein Atomprogramm wieder aufzunehmen und die von den USA und Israel verwüsteten Atomanlagen wieder aufzubauen und erneut in Betrieb zu nehmen. Irans Präsident Pezeshkian betonte, sein Land strebe weiterhin eine friedliche zivile Nutzung der Atomenergie an. Trump hatte unmittelbar nach den US-Angriffen auf den Iran im Juni betont, sollte der Iran sein Atomprogramm wieder aufnehmen, würden die USA erneut und noch vernichtender zuschlagen. Rechnest du damit, dass die USA abermals den Iran angreifen werden? Oder waren das nur großspurige Aussagen von Trump?
I think if Iran develops its nuclear enrichment capability and brings it back into operation, there's a great risk that the United States will attack that. Iran, together with Russia and China, have declared that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Barack Obama's 2015 Iran nuclear deal, is dead. It's done. Iran's not going to comply with it. So there's no checks and balances on Iran's program, and the United States and Israel have, together with Europe, made the case that Iran's program has a military dimension. Iran denies this, but by committing to this posture, the United States now has, taken ourselves back to the same trap that Barack Obama faced in 2014, 2015, where if you continue to call the Iranian program a threat and Iran fails to comply with your demands on how to curtail this, then your only choice remaining is military action. And then the United States opted out of that choice in 2014, 2015 by agreeing for Iran's ability to retain nuclear enrichment. The question now is, is Trump capable of that kind of compromise? Because this crisis goes away the moment the United States says Iran is allowed to have a peaceful nuclear energy enrichment program without monitored, but without restrictions, meaning Iran will be treated as every other signatory state of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty when it comes to indigenously pursuing these technologies. Right now, Israel and the United States aren't in a position to do this, which means that Iran is creating the conditions that are conducive to American military action. The counter, though, is that the consequences of American military action are dire. The Iranians demonstrated to Israel that their ballistic missile force can bring a lot of pain and harm to Israel. That's why Israel begged for peace at the end of the 12-day conflict. And if the United States or Israel or both were to attack Iran, then the Iranian retaliation, I believe, would be absolutely devastating for Israel. And so the conditions exist for another nuclear compromise, another nuclear deal. Whether the Iranians will ever trust the United States again, though, is questionable. Not only did the United States pull out of the JCPOA, but they undermined it, politically, and they used the concept of negotiations as a setup to facilitate the Israeli attack on Iran. So we're in a very difficult situation, because if there isn't a diplomatic solution, then there will be a lot of pressure on the President of the United States to carry out a concerted strike against Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Der Angriff auf den Iran, die Bombardierung des Jemen, die Kriegsdrohung gegen Venezuela und sogar Drohungen eines Angriffs auf Nigeria. Wenn du als US-Bürger und Veteran auf dein Land blickst, welches Bild von Amerika trägt die Trump-Regierung gerade in alle Welt? Ist es ein Bild von Fortschritt, Zivilisation und Demokratie? Oder vielmehr Erpressung, Gewalt und Tyrannei? Wie blickst du gerade auf die Außenpolitik deines Landes? Wofür stehen die USA und wofür könnten sie stehen?
Well, the Trump administration has spoken about peace through strength. And that's sort of a perverse juxtaposition because strength then comes not just from the theory of war, but the reality of war, the ability and the willingness to carry it out. I think, the image that Donald Trump is trying to project of America on the world is a leader who's strong and capable of standing up, etc. I don't think they've successfully sold this image. I think the world views the United States completely differently as, an overbearing hegemon, willing to use force to retain, influence that is no longer sustainable because of a multipolar reality. BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. The world has grown up, and Trump isn't. His policies aren't aligning with this new reality. So I think, we in America are fooling ourselves into believing that the world sees us one way, when the reality appears that the world sees us exactly the opposite, as a force of tyranny, as a force of violence, as a force of chaos. At the moment, the United States still retains enough power economically, politically, and militarily that we can insist on, nations doing things, or else there will be consequences. But, increasingly, the United States is being challenged. There's pushback from Russia, from China, et cetera. And, our success in dealing with these pushbacks isn't notable. Look at Ukraine. People keep talking about, Russia not winning the war. Well, the United States has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine in a losing effort. We are losing this war. NATO is losing this war. That's not necessarily the sign of strength, I think, that Donald Trump wanted to project.
Liebe Zuschauer, wenn euch unsere Beiträge gefallen, teilt sie unbedingt in den sozialen Medien. Abonniert unseren Kanal und drückt auf die Glocke, damit ihr keine Veröffentlichung von Gegenpol verpasst.